The morning my parents left, I sat on the front steps with a bowl of cereal going soft in my lap, waiting for my mother to come back out and tell me it was all a joke. He never did. Inside, there was a note on the kitchen table, scribbled on the back of a grocery receipt. My father's handwriting, not hers. She never liked writing things down. It said they needed a fresh start. It said my Aunt Cheryl in Ohio had space. It said they were sorry. The word sorry was smudged in one corner, and I spent too long trying to decide if that meant someone had cried while writing it or if it was just a coffee ring. In the end, I chose the coffee. It felt easier to believe. I was 11. When I called Aunt Cheryl from the neighbor's phone, the landline had been quietly cut off weeks earlier. She went silent for so long I thought the line had dropped. Then she said very carefully, "Ellie, honey, what do you mean they're gone?" Not really a question. More like something she was trying to understand without letting me hear the panic underneath. She drove 8 hours through the night to get me. I remember sitting on those same steps in the dark when her headlights finally turned into the driveway sometime after 2 a.m. She got out before the car had fully stopped. When she reached me, she didn't ask anything. She just pulled me into her arms and held on. Her breath shook even though she tried to steady it. That was the first time I understood that how someone holds you can say more than anything they might try to explain. Aunt Cheryl was 51. A retired high school librarian who lived alone in a small blue house in Columbus. She had 2 cats, a backyard garden that took up more space than the lawn, and a porch swing she repainted every spring without fail. She'd never married, never had children. She drove an old Subaru, baked her own bread on Sundays, and owned more books than anyone I'd ever met. She was also my mother's older sister, which meant she knew exactly who my mother was. And still, not once, not ever, did she say a cruel word about either of my parents in front of me. I didn't understand the weight of that restraint until much later. The first few months weren't bad. Just unfamiliar. I kept waiting for something else to fall apart. I slept lightly, woke at the smallest sounds, half expecting to come downstairs and find another note waiting somewhere. I learned quickly how to take up less space. I washed my dishes without being asked. Folded my own laundry. Stopped asking for things unless I was almost certain the answer would be yes. My aunt noticed. Of course she did. She didn't say anything at first. Then one Saturday morning in December, she set a plate of toast in front of me and sat down across the table. "Ellie," she said gently, "I need you to hear this. You don't have to earn your place here. You're not a guest. This is your home. For as long as you need it to be, which I hope is a very long time." I stared at the toast instead of her. "You don't have to say anything," she added. "I just needed you to know." So I nodded and took a bite. Sourdough, still warm, with real butter and strawberry jam she'd made herself from the garden. Tasted like something solid. Like something that wouldn't disappear overnight. Even now, I think it might be the best thing I've ever eaten. She enrolled me in the local middle school before Christmas. She showed up to everything: parent-teacher conferences, school plays, even the one where I had 4 forgettable lines. She sat in the 3rd row and clapped like I was the lead. When my first report card came, mostly B's, 1 A in English, A C in math I didn't talk about, she stuck it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a book. We didn't talk much about my parents. Not because it was off limits, just because there wasn't much to say. For a while they had a number somewhere in Nevada. My aunt tried calling it twice that first year. Both times it went to voicemail. She left messages anyway. They never called back. After a while the number stopped working altogether and we stopped bringing it up. Not out of agreement, just because there was nothing left to say. I started writing instead. That first Christmas my aunt gave me a journal. Green hardcover, thick pages, a ribbon bookmark that felt almost too nice to use. She told me writing things down was how she made sense of the world. That I didn't have to show it to anyone. That the goal wasn't always to feel better, just to feel clearly. I didn't fully understand that then. I do now. I wrote about my parents. About the house we used to live in. The way the screen door stuck every summer. The fading memory of my mother's perfume. How I could still recall it but less precisely each time I tried. I wrote about my birthday in April, how it passed without a card, a call, anything at all. And how I sat with that feeling, trying to name it properly instead of just calling it sad. My aunt had told me sad was often a shortcut. That if you looked closer there was usually something more exact underneath. So I kept looking. What I found was something closer to invisible. Like I only existed where someone chose to see me. And she had chosen. That mattered more than I knew how to explain back then. The years moved forward, quietly but steadily. I got better at math. I made a friend named Dana who laughed at everything whether it was funny or not and somehow made it funnier anyway. In ninth grade I joined the school paper and realized I liked asking questions. I liked listening. I liked finding the one sentence that could hold an entire story together. My aunt read every article I wrote. She kept them all in a folder like they were something worth saving. She taught me things too, always in that same quiet way. How to balance a checkbook on paper because she didn't trust apps. How to read a lease before signing it. How to pause instead of answering right away to say, I need to think about that, and mean it. How to cook a handful of meals really well instead of a dozen badly. How to sit in silence without rushing to fill it. How to say no without apologizing. You're going to meet people, she told me once when I was about 16, who think they can tell you what you're worth. The ones who actually know you won't need to say it. Watch for the difference. I wrote that down. She also made sure I understood what had happened, not just emotionally but legally. The week she brought me to Columbus, she contacted a family attorney. She established guardianship. She filed everything with child services. Not to punish my parents, she said. To protect me. To make sure no one can ever show up and pretend you don't belong where you are. I had a home. And she made it official. I didn't realize then how much that would matter later. I graduated high school on a warm Thursday in June. My aunt sat in the bleachers in a bright yellow dress, crying openly when they called my name. I saw her from the stage and nearly lost it right there, but I held it together, barely, until I got back to my seat. Then Dana grabbed my hand and that was it. I cried anyway. Afterward we went to my aunt's favorite Italian place. She handed me an envelope across the table. Inside was a card filled with her handwriting. So many words I had to stop halfway through to breathe, and a check made out to my name for more money than I'd ever seen. For your first and last month's rent, she said. Or school. Or both. Whatever you decide. It's yours. I went to a state university about 40 minutes away. I chose communications mostly because it felt like an extension of what I'd already been doing. Listening, asking, writing things down, trying to make sense of them. And for the first time in a long time, my life didn't feel like something I was waiting to lose. It felt like something I was finally building. I went home most weekends. Not out of obligation but because I wanted to. Because the blue house in Columbus, with the garden, the cats and sourdough toast on Sunday mornings, was the most real place I knew. By the time I graduated college, my aunt was 63. She moved a little slower. There was a stiffness in her step she tried to ignore. A bad hip she'd been meaning to look into for far too long. Eventually, I told her I'd drive her to every appointment myself if she would just call the doctor. She called. I drove. The surgery went well. She complained about physical therapy with that dry, precise humor of hers, the kind that made even the therapist laugh. I had a feeling that was intentional. Sometime that same year she met with her attorney. I didn't know about it then. I was 24 when I landed my first real job, a communications coordinator at a nonprofit in Columbus. It meant I could afford my own apartment and still be 10 minutes from the blue house. Felt like the perfect distance. She helped me move in on a Saturday. Boxes everywhere, nothing quite in place yet. She sat on my second-hand couch, looked around the small living room and said softly, "You did it, Ellie." And I understood she didn't just mean the apartment. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. She'd been in the hospital for 3 days after what they called a cardiac event. A careful phrase for something that wasn't supposed to happen but did. She'd been stable. I'd been visiting twice a day. She kept telling me to stop fussing. That morning she told me to go to work. Said she had a book, the remote and a nurse she liked. So I went. The call came at 11:14. I don't remember the drive. I remember the parking garage, the elevator, the hallway, and then the room. It was quiet in a way that isn't normal quiet. Heavier. Like the air itself didn't know where to settle. I sat with her for a long time. Held her hand. Talked because it felt like the right thing to do whether she could hear me or not. I told her about the nonprofit's fall fundraiser. I told her the sourdough recipe she taught me had finally worked the previous Sunday. I told her the cats would be okay. Dana had already offered to take the younger one, and I'd keep the older one because she was difficult and I loved her for it. I told her she had made me. That everything I was proud of, everything I was still working on, had grown in that blue house with her garden out back. That she had chosen me when she didn't have to. That I would spend the rest of my life trying to become the person she already believed I was. The attorney called 2 days later. Her name was Patricia. Careful voice. Kind but measured. She said the estate wasn't complicated, but there were a few things better discussed in person. We scheduled the meeting for Thursday. I wrote it in my planner and assumed that was it, that the rest would just be grief stretching out in front of me. I didn't expect my mother to walk through that door. I hadn't seen her in 16 years. Not a call. Not a card. Not a message passed through anyone else. Just absence. So complete that at some point I stopped measuring it. She looked older. That was my first thought, followed immediately by how strange it was to notice something so obvious. 16 years had passed. Of course she looked older. She wore a coat I didn't recognize. Carried a bag I didn't recognize. The woman beside her I didn't recognize at all, until she introduced her as my cousin Stacy. Apparently we'd met once. I had no memory of it. My mother looked at me across the small conference room. "Ellie, you look just like," she started then stopped. I didn't ask who. Patricia handled it the way someone does when they've seen versions of this before. Efficient. She guided us to our seats, giving us something to do so the tension didn't swallow the room whole. Before she began, my mother reached across the table. Not touching my hand, just placing hers close enough to suggest it. "I know this isn't the time," she said quietly, "but I was hoping we could." "We can talk after," I said. It wasn't harsh. It was simply the only sentence I had. Patricia opened the folder. My aunt had left the house to me. Her car went to her friend Margaret, which felt exactly right. A collection of first edition books was donated to the Columbus Public Library, so perfectly her that I almost smiled. There was a small amount left to her church. Everything else, her savings, her investments, the account she'd built quietly over 30 years of careful living, came to me. Patricia read the figure out loud. Somewhere beside me my mother made a sound. I didn't look. Then Patricia paused and said, "There is also a letter. Your aunt requested that it be read aloud." She glanced around the room. "It's addressed to everyone present." Patricia read the letter. It was brief. My aunt had never believed in long speeches. Even so, every word carried. In that steady, careful voice, Patricia read that she had spent 16 years watching a girl become a woman defined by integrity, steadiness, and a quiet kind of courage most people never reach. She wrote that she hadn't built her life to leave it behind to just anyone, but to the person who had been there. The one who drove her to physical therapy, who read Lisa's line by line, who learned how to make sourdough, who called every Sunday, who sat beside her in a hospital room in October and held her hand. Then came the line that stayed with me. Presence is not a small thing. It is, in fact, the whole thing. She wrote that she wasn't angry. That every decision had been made freely with full understanding. And that if anyone felt the absence of what she had left them, she hoped they would sit with that feeling long enough to truly understand it. When Patricia finished, the room was very still. My mother spoke first. "I'm her daughter." Her voice wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. "I know," I said gently. I had chosen gentleness a long time ago. She was my aunt. I held her gaze, steady but not unkind. She was the one who drove 8 hours in the middle of the night to get me. He came to my school plays. He kept my report cards. He taught me how to read a lease. She was the one who stayed. I paused, letting the words settle. "I'm sorry you're hurting," I added quietly. "I really am. But I think you understand." She didn't respond. Stacy started to say something about fairness, but Patricia stepped in smoothly, closing the folder and guiding the moment to an end. "Professional. Final." She said she'd be available through her office for any procedural questions. I shook her hand, thanked her, put on my coat. In the elevator, I found myself thinking about a morning years earlier. I must have been 13, maybe 14. A Saturday in January. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table with my journal open, not writing, just staring at the page. My aunt came in, didn't ask what was wrong. She made coffee, set a cup in front of me, and sat down across the table. She waited. After a while, I asked, "Do you think they think about me?" She didn't answer right away. She thought about it, really thought about it. "I think," she said finally, "that sometimes people are so busy running from things, they don't stop to understand what they're leaving behind." She wrapped both hands around her mug. That doesn't mean they don't think about you. It means they're not done being afraid of whatever they're afraid of. That's their work, she added softly. Not yours. What's mine? I asked. She looked at me, steady and certain. To know that the people who are here chose to be here, she said. And that choice matters. I thought about that in the elevator. In the parking garage. Driving home. I thought about it when I walked into my apartment, where my difficult old cat was waiting on the windowsill like she'd been keeping watch. She chose. Every single day for 16 years she chose. And so did I. I chose to come home on weekends. I chose to drive her to appointments. I chose to call every Sunday even when there was nothing to say. Because being present isn't always about having something to offer. Sometimes it's just about showing up. Presence is not a small thing. I made tea. Sat down. Opened a new journal, green hardcover because some things you keep the same, and started writing. Not about the money. About the porch swing she repainted every spring. About the way she held her coffee cup with both hands. About the sourdough and the folder of my old school articles she never threw away. About the quiet little sound she made when she was trying not to laugh at something she'd decided wasn't appropriate. About the screen door in summer. I wrote, she made me a home. I tried to be worthy of it. I hope she knows I understand what she gave me. I hope I spend the rest of my life giving it back in whatever ways I can. When I finished, I closed the journal. Outside, the city moved the way cities do. Lights flickering on, cars passing, everything continuing. The cat climbed into my lap like it was an accident. I rested my hand on her back and felt her breathing steady and warm. And I thought, this is enough. The people who choose to stay, who choose to show up, they are enough. They are mine. And I am theirs. And nothing anyone failed to choose can ever take that away.